My name is Ivy Collins. I'm 32 years old and a single mother of two beautiful children. I never thought I'd be standing on my mother's doorstep in the pouring rain, suitcases in hand, with nowhere else to go. The eviction notice had given us 3 days, and now we were here, my last hope. When she opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to something colder. "There isn't enough space for your kids," my mom whispered at the door. "I'm no longer paying your—" Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had family turn their back on you when you needed them most. 3 years ago, my life looked completely different. I had a beautiful 3-bedroom house in the suburbs with a small garden where my son James and daughter Lily would play for hours. My husband Mark and I had been married for 8 years, and from the outside, everything seemed perfect. I worked part-time as an administrative assistant while Mark had a good job in sales. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable and secure. That security came crashing down when I discovered Mark had a gambling addiction he'd hidden for years. At first, there were small signs. I ignored unexplained absences, defensive responses when I asked about our finances, and mysterious cash withdrawals. By the time I confronted him, he had drained our savings account, maxed out multiple credit cards in both our names, and taken a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge. "It was just going to be this one time," he kept saying when I found out. I was so close to winning it all back. The divorce was quick but painful. Mark disappeared shortly after leaving me with all the debt and 2 confused children who couldn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. The bank foreclosed on our house within months, and we moved to a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. I took on full-time work, but my entry-level salary barely covered our basic expenses, let alone the mountain of debt Mark had left behind. That's when my mother stepped in with financial support. She'd always been comfortable financially after my father passed away, and left her with a substantial insurance payout and their fully paid house. Each month, she would transfer money to help with rent or utilities, always making sure I knew it was her generosity keeping a roof over our heads. "If you'd listened to me about Mark in the first place, you wouldn't be in this situation," she would remind me during our weekly phone calls. "I told you he wasn't reliable husband material." My relationship with my mother had always been complicated. Her love came with conditions, her support with criticism. Growing up, nothing I did was ever quite good enough. My grades were high, but not the highest, my achievements noteworthy, but not exceptional. She had wanted a daughter who would fulfill all the dreams she'd abandoned to marry my father young, and I had consistently disappointed her by being merely average in her eyes. I had hoped things would be different with my children. She wasn't the warmest grandmother, visiting only on birthdays and major holidays, but she did bring expensive gifts and take acceptable photos for her social media. James and Lily were always on their best behavior around her, intuiting somehow that Grandma's approval was fragile and conditional. "They're good kids," she once admitted, which from her was high praise. A shame about their father's genetics, though. When the final eviction notice came after 3 months of missed rent payments, I was desperate. I'd been applying for better-paying jobs without success, and the part-time evening job I'd picked up stocking shelves wasn't enough to catch up on our mounting bills. With nowhere else to turn, I called my mother. "We need a place to stay," I told her, swallowing my pride. "Just until I can save up for a new apartment. 3 months max." The silence on the phone stretched for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Fine," she finally said. "But this is temporary, Ivy." Very temporary. Her reluctant agreement gave me hope. Despite our difficult relationship, she was still my mother. Surely she wouldn't turn away her own daughter and grandchildren in their moment of need. I packed our essential belongings, gave away what wouldn't fit in our suitcases, and told the children we were going to stay with Grandma for a little while. An adventure, I called it, trying to mask my own uncertainty with forced cheerfulness. "Will we have our own rooms at Grandma's?" Lily asked, her 5-year-old face serious with concern about the most important details. I'm not sure, sweetie, I answered honestly. But we'll be together, and that's what matters. If only I had known then what was waiting for us on the other side of my mother's door. The rain was coming down in sheets by the time our bus reached my mother's neighborhood. We had to walk the final 3 blocks, and despite my efforts to shield them with my jacket, James and Lily were soaked through by the time we reached her house. It looked exactly as I remembered it, a pristine white 2-story colonial with black shutters and a perfectly maintained lawn. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow that felt misleadingly welcoming. I rang the doorbell, trying to quiet the anxiety churning in my stomach. James leaned against my leg, clearly exhausted from our journey across town. Lily stood tall beside me, clutching her small pink backpack like a shield. My mother opened the door wearing an expensive-looking silk loungewear set, her silver-streaked hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. Her eyes moved from my face to the children, then to our 4 suitcases and assorted bags. "You brought a lot," she said by way of greeting. "This is everything we own now," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "May we come in? The kids are soaked and tired." She stepped aside reluctantly, and we shuffled into the warm, dry entryway. The house smelled of cinnamon and furniture polish exactly as it had throughout my childhood. Some things never changed. "Take your shoes off," she instructed automatically. "I just had the floors redone." We complied, the children silently removing their wet sneakers while I helped with their jackets. My mother stood watching, making no move to assist or offer towels for our dripping hair. "Grandma, I'm hungry," James said, suddenly breaking the uncomfortable silence. At 7, he was still too young to fully recognize the tension in the air. My mother's lips thinned. "There are some crackers in the kitchen," she said. "But it's very late for snacks." "I'll get them something small," I interjected. "They haven't eaten since lunch." As I turned toward the kitchen, my mother caught my arm and leaned close to my ear. Her voice dropped to a whisper that the children couldn't hear. "There isn't enough space for your kids," she said, her fingernails digging slightly into my skin. "I'm no longer paying your way if they stay too. My house isn't set up for children. You should have planned better." I pulled back, shock rendering me momentarily speechless. Before I could respond, she continued in a normal volume. "You can put your things in the guest room for tonight. Just tonight. We need to talk privately after the children are asleep." The look in her eyes was clear. This wasn't up for discussion, at least not in front of James and Lily. I nodded mutely and guided the children toward the kitchen, my mind racing. What did she mean, there wasn't enough space? She had 4 bedrooms in this house, and only she lived here. And what was this about the children not staying 20 minutes later after a meager meal of crackers and cheese I'd found in her immaculate refrigerator? I was tucking the children into the queen-sized bed in the guest room. The room was clearly not intended for actual guests. It functioned as my mother's home office with an expensive desk and computer setup taking up one wall. The bed looked rarely used, its stiff decorative pillows arranged precisely against the headboard. "This isn't how I remember Grandma's house," James whispered as I pulled the unfamiliar comforter up to his chin. "It's been a while since we visited," I said, forcing a smile. "Try to get some sleep, buddy." Lily was already drifting off exhaustion, overcoming the strangeness of our situation. I kissed their foreheads and quietly left the room, closing the door behind me. My mother was waiting in the living room, seated primly on the edge of her white suede sofa, a glass of red wine in hand. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I noticed she hadn't poured a glass for me. "What did you mean there's no space for the children?" I asked, remaining standing. "You have plenty of room in this house." She took a slow sip of her wine before answering. "I've converted the other bedrooms. One is my dressing room now, one is my home gym. I need those spaces. I'm not rearranging my entire life because of your poor decisions." They're your grandchildren, I said, incredulous. And we have nowhere else to go. That's not entirely true, she replied, setting down her glass. I spoke with Mark's parents last week. This was news to me. You what? Why would you contact them? They're still family, Ivy. Just because you and Mark couldn't make it work doesn't change that. They told me they'd be happy to take James and Lily while you get back on your feet. I felt as though the floor had dropped out from under me. You suggested I send my children away to live with people they barely know. Don't be dramatic. They see the children on holidays, and Mark's parents have a stable home unlike you at the moment. She picked up her wine again, eyeing me over the rim. I'm willing to help you, Ivy. You can stay here while you find a job and save up for a new place. But I won't have my house turned upside down by two noisy children. So, your ultimatum is that I give up my children to get your help? My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Lower your voice, she hissed. The neighbors will hear you, and it's not giving them up. It's a temporary arrangement that makes sense for everyone. Not for me, and definitely not for James and Lily. She stood up abruptly. This is exactly your problem, Ivy. You make emotional decisions instead of practical ones. It's why you're in this mess to begin with. She walked to the window, adjusting the curtain slightly. You can all stay tonight because it's late and raining. But tomorrow, you need to make arrangements. I'm no longer paying your way if you insist on keeping those kids with you instead of doing what's sensible. I stood there stunned by her coldness as she turned and walked toward her bedroom. The sheets on the guest bed are new. Try not to let the children ruin them, she called over her shoulder. We'll continue this discussion in the morning. I remained in the living room long after she'd gone, trying to process what had just happened and what I was going to do next. Through the thin curtains, I could see curious neighbors peering out at our arrival scene, no doubt wondering about the prodigal daughter's return with children in tow. Eventually, I returned to the guest room and curled up in the small space left on the bed between my sleeping children. As I listened to their peaceful breathing, I knew with absolute certainty that no matter what happened next, we would face it together. I would not be separated from my children, not even for my mother's financial support. Tomorrow would be soon enough to figure out our next move. For tonight at least, we had a roof over our heads, even if we weren't truly welcome beneath it. Sleep eluded me that night despite my exhaustion. Around midnight, after tossing and turning for hours, I carefully extracted myself from between the children and decided to explore the house. Perhaps I could find some insight into my mother's cold reception, some clue to help me navigate the minefield that tomorrow would surely bring. The house was quiet, except for the occasional tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a relic from my childhood that had survived my mother's numerous redecorating projects over the years. I moved silently through the familiar yet altered spaces, noticing all the changes she had made since my last visit nearly a year ago. The living room had been completely redone in shades of white and pale gray, with furniture that looked more suitable for a magazine spread than actual use. In the corner stood a glass display cabinet that was new, filled with delicate crystal figurines I didn't recognize. I carefully opened it, finding a small price tag still attached to one piece, $600 for a tiny glass bird. The amount made me dizzy when I thought about how long that money would have kept us in our apartment. The kitchen had also been renovated with gleaming marble countertops and brand new stainless steel appliances. A wine refrigerator hummed softly in the corner, stocked with dozens of bottles. On the counter sat a shopping bag from an expensive kitchenware store, the receipt still visible, nearly $1,000 spent on copper cookware and specialty gadgets. This didn't align with my mother's claim that she couldn't afford to help us anymore. As I stood absorbing this, I heard my mother's voice. For a moment, I thought she had discovered me snooping, but then I realized she was on the phone in her bedroom, her voice carrying through the heating vent. "It's just so inconvenient, Sandra," she was saying, "showing up like that with those children and all their things expecting me to rearrange my life. You know I just had the house featured in Home and Garden Children would destroy everything." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "No, just for tonight. I've made it clear this isn't a solution. I suggested Mark's parents take the children, which makes perfect sense, but you know how dramatic Ivy can be. Always making the emotional choice instead of the practical one." Another pause. "Of course I care about them, but caring doesn't mean enabling poor decisions. And frankly, I've done my part raising children. I'm finally living the life I want. I'm not going backward to raising kids again just because my daughter couldn't maintain her marriage." I backed away from the vent, my chest tight with hurt and anger. I continued my exploration, moving toward what used to be the second guest bedroom. When I turned the handle and pushed open the door, I was greeted not by a bedroom at all, but a fully equipped yoga and meditation studio complete with a wall of mirrors, expensive-looking equipment, and a small water feature burbling peacefully in the corner. So much for not enough space. The room could easily have accommodated both children with space to spare. This wasn't about lack of room at all, but lack of willingness to be inconvenienced. I moved on to what had been my childhood bedroom, steeling myself before opening the door. The room had been completely transformed into a luxurious dressing room, with custom-built closets lining the walls, a central island with jewelry displays, and a makeup vanity with professional lighting. No trace remained of the space where I had grown up, dreamed, cried, and planned my future. It had been wiped away as thoroughly as if I had never existed. This thought led me to search for our family photos. Growing up, the hallway had been lined with framed pictures documenting my childhood and our family history. Now the walls held only expensive artwork and framed travel memorabilia. In the living room, where family photos had once cluttered every surface, there were now only carefully curated decorative objects and coffee table books. I finally found one small photo of me tucked away on a bookshelf, partially hidden behind an ornamental vase. It was from my high school graduation, my mother standing beside me with her camera-ready smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. There were no photos of my wedding, none of James and Lily, nothing to indicate she had grandchildren or family beyond herself. The house told the story clearly. My mother had erased us from her life, except when it suited her to play the role of benevolent matriarch. The financial support she had provided wasn't about love or family obligation, but about control and the appearance of generosity she could display to her friends and neighbors. Around 3 a.m, I sat at the kitchen island with my phone checking my bank balance for the 100th time, $127.45. Not enough for a hotel for more than one night. Definitely not enough for a security deposit on a new apartment. In desperation, I texted 3 friends from before the divorce, people I had gradually lost touch with as my financial situation deteriorated and social outings became impossible. "Emergency. Need place to stay with kids for a few days. Can explain later. Please help if possible." I sent the message knowing how it would appear, how desperate it made me seem. But pride wouldn't keep a roof over my children's heads, and I was running out of options. None of them responded immediately, which wasn't surprising given the hour, but each minute of silence felt like another door closing. In the downstairs bathroom, I finally allowed myself the breakdown I'd been suppressing all day. Sitting on the edge of the bathtub, I muffled my sobs with a plush hand towel that probably cost more than our weekly food budget. I cried for the home we'd lost, for the mother I needed, but never had, for the fear and uncertainty that had become constant companions. Most of all, I cried for James and Lily, innocent children who deserved stability and unconditional love from their family. When the tears finally subsided, I washed my face with cold water and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were puffy, my face blotchy, but something had shifted inside me. Perhaps it was the tangible evidence of my mother's true priorities. Perhaps it was simply hitting emotional rock bottom. But I felt a strange clarity emerging from the despair. My mother would never be the parent I needed, or the grandmother my children deserved. She would never change. But I could. I returned to the guest room and curled protectively around my sleeping children, finally drifting into an exhausted sleep as dawn began to lighten the sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but I would face them with the knowledge that whatever happened, it was up to me to protect our little family. My mother had made her choice. Now I would make mine. I woke to the sound of drawers opening and closing. Disoriented, I sat up quickly, momentarily forgetting where we were. The events of the previous day came rushing back as I saw my mother rifling through our open suitcases, removing items and placing them in a separate pile on the floor. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice still rough with sleep. She straightened, unembarrassed at being caught going through our belongings. "Organizing," she said, as if it were perfectly normal. "You've brought far too much for a short stay. These items are unnecessary." I looked at the pile she'd created, some of James's action figures, Lily's favorite stuffed unicorn, a photo album, and several items of the children's clothing. "Those aren't unnecessary," I said, getting out of bed carefully to avoid waking the children. "Those are their comfort items, and they need those clothes. They have enough outfits for a few days, which is all you'll be here. The toys take up too much space and will just create mess. I've put them aside for donation." "You will not donate my children's belongings," I said firmly, keeping my voice low. "Please, put everything back exactly as you found it." She gave me a look I recognized from childhood, the one that said I was being unreasonable and difficult. "You're in no position to make demands, Ivy. This is my house, and I won't have it cluttered with all this junk." "Mom, these are their personal possessions. The few things they have left after losing their home. You can't just decide what they get to keep." She pursed her lips, but didn't respond, instead turning and walking out of the room. I quickly returned the items to our suitcases, zipping them securely. James stirred, opening his eyes slowly. "Morning, Mommy," he said, his voice small and uncertain in the unfamiliar surroundings. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied, forcing brightness into my voice. "Did you sleep okay?" He nodded, sitting up and looking around. "Where's my Captain America?" His favorite action figure, the one my mother had just tried to set aside for donation. "Right here," I said, retrieving it from the suitcase and handing it to him. "Keep it with you today, okay?" Lily woke soon after, immediately asking for her unicorn, which I also returned to her. We got dressed quickly, the children subdued as they sensed the tension in the air. By the time we made our way to the kitchen, my mother had prepared breakfast, plain oatmeal and sliced fruit arranged precisely on the table. "I don't like oatmeal," James whispered to me as we sat down. "Just try a few bites," I whispered back, to be polite. My mother sat at the head of the table, already dressed immaculately in pressed slacks and a cashmere sweater despite the early hour. She watched critically as the children picked at their food. "You should have taught them better table manners," she commented, sipping her coffee. "And healthier eating habits. Children need to learn to eat what's served without complaint." I bit back a sharp retort, not wanting to escalate tensions in front of James and Lily. "They're doing their best. It's been a stressful time." "Which brings us to what we discussed last night," she continued, setting down her cup with a definitive click. "I've given it more thought, and I stand by what I said. You can stay here temporarily while you get back on your feet, but the children should go to Mark's parents." James looked up at this, his forehead wrinkling in confusion. "Go where?" "Nowhere," I said quickly. "Finish your breakfast, honey." "Don't lie to them, Ivy," my mother said. That's another poor parenting choice. Children need to understand reality. She turned to James and Lily with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Your mommy is having some grown-up problems right now. She needs time to fix them, and it would be better if you stayed with your other grandparents for a little while. Lily's lower lip began to tremble. I want to stay with Mommy. Of course you do, dear, but sometimes what we want isn't what's best for everyone. Mom, stop, I hissed. We are not having this conversation now. When should we have it? Then I've already spoken with Linda and Robert, and they're expecting my call today. The revelation that she had gone so far as to make arrangements without my knowledge or consent was the final straw. You had no right to do that. I had every right. You came to me for help, and I'm providing a solution. The most sensible solution for everyone involved. Except for my children who need to be with their mother. What they need is stability, which you cannot provide right now. This is exactly the kind of poor life choices that got you into this situation, Ivy. Emotional decisions instead of practical ones. Always taking on more burden than necessary. My children are not a burden, I said, my hands clenching into fists under the table. Perhaps not to you, but they certainly are to me and my lifestyle. I've earned my peace and quiet after raising you. I'm not interested in having my house overrun with noise and mess and chaos. She turned to the children again. Your mother loves you, but sometimes love means making hard choices, like admitting when you can't properly care for someone. Lily began to cry quietly, fat tears rolling down her cheeks. James, however, sat up straighter in his chair, his small face suddenly fierce. My mommy takes very good care of us, he said, his voice stronger than I'd heard in months. She's the best mommy in the whole world. My mother's expression hardened as she regarded her grandson. You're too young to understand, James, and that attitude shows you're just like your irresponsible father, always thinking about what you want instead of what's practical. Something inside me snapped at her cruel words to my 7-year-old son. All the years of criticism, conditional love, and emotional manipulation crystallized in that moment into perfect clarity. I stood up so quickly, my chair toppled backward. That's enough, I said, my voice deadly calm, despite the fury coursing through me. You will not speak to my son that way. You will not speak to either of my children that way. Sit down, Ivy. You're making a scene. No, I'm finally standing up, for myself and for my children. I moved around the table to stand between her and the kids. I came here hoping for help from my mother, but you've made it abundantly clear that your material possessions and comfortable lifestyle are more important to you than your family. That's not fair, she protested. I offered help, just not in the way you wanted it. You're being unreasonable. No, I'm being a mother, something you've never fully understood. The words were harsh, but years of buried resentment were surfacing now, impossible to contain. You've always seen me as an extension of yourself, a project to mold and critique. And now you see my children the same way, objects to be managed rather than people to be loved. She stood as well, her face flushed with anger. After everything I've done for you, the money I've given you, this is how you repay me. Money isn't love, Mom. It's just money. And you've used it as a weapon to control me my entire life. But it stops now. I turned to James and Lily, who were watching with wide, frightened eyes. Kids, go get your things. We're leaving. Don't be ridiculous, my mother snapped. Where will you go? You have nowhere else. Anywhere is better than here, I replied, helping Lily from her chair. Somewhere my children won't be told their burdens, Somewhere they'll be valued for who they are, not what's convenient. Fine, she shouted, abandoning her usual concern for appearances. Leave! But don't come crawling back when you're sleeping in your car. I'm done enabling your poor choices, Ivy. I'm no longer paying your bills or solving your problems. You're on your own. I ushered the children toward the guest room, pausing only to look back at the stranger, who was my mother. I'd rather be on my own than accept help with these kinds of strings attached. You need to decide what's more important, Mom, your pride and your perfect house, or your relationship with your only daughter and grandchildren. Her face hardened into the mask of disapproval I knew so well. You're making me choose. No, I said quietly. You've already chosen. I'm just finally accepting it. I turned away, not waiting for her response, and went to help my children pack what little we had left in this world. The decision was terrifying, but for the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt a strange sense of freedom. We might have nowhere to go, but at least we would be going there together. 20 minutes later, we stood on the front lawn with our 4 suitcases and assorted bags exactly as we had arrived the previous night. Except now it was a clear morning instead of a rainy evening. My mother watched from the doorway, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief that I had actually followed through on my threat to leave. Don't come back when you're homeless, she called as I began to wheel our suitcases toward the sidewalk. I mean it, Ivy. This is your last chance. I didn't respond or look back, focusing instead on helping the children manage their small backpacks. We began walking away from the house, no destination in mind, except away. Where are we going, Mommy? Lily asked, her small hand clutching mine tightly. I'm not sure yet, sweetie, I admitted, but we'll figure it out together. Is Grandma mad at us? James asked, glancing back at the house over his shoulder. How to explain adult dysfunction to a 7-year-old. Grandma is having a hard time understanding what we need right now. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things. She said mean things about me, he said quietly, that I'm like Daddy. I stopped walking and knelt down to his level, looking him straight in the eyes. Listen to me, James. You are your own wonderful, special person. You're not like Daddy or like Grandma or even like me. You're you. And you were incredibly brave in there standing up for us. I'm so proud of you. He nodded solemnly, and I could see him processing this, storing it away, somewhere inside his resilient child's heart. I stood again, and we continued our walk down the tree-lined street of my childhood, passing neighbors who pretended not to watch our small procession, but whose curious eyes I could feel on our backs. We reached a small park about 6 blocks from my mother's house, and I suggested we take a break. The children headed for the swings while I sat on a nearby bench, pulled out my phone, and began the desperate task of finding us somewhere to go. I checked my texts, first heart sinking, when I saw no responses from the friends I'd reached out to in the night. With shaking fingers, I dialed the number for a local women's shelter I'd found online. They were full, the apologetic voice on the other end informed me, but they could put us on a waiting list. 3 to 4 weeks, they estimated. I thanked them and hung up, moving on to budget motels. The cheapest was $89 per night, which would deplete our meager funds in less than 2 days. I called a church with an emergency housing program also full, with a waiting list of over a month. By the time the children tired of the swings and came to sit beside me, I had made over a dozen calls with no viable options. My phone buzzed with a text, and I snatched it up eagerly. It was from my friend Tanya, responding to my middle-of-the-night plea. So sorry to hear you're in trouble. Can offer couch for 1 night, but my place is tiny, and I'm leaving town for work tomorrow. Will that help? 1 night. Better than nothing, I supposed. I quickly texted back my acceptance and gratitude, relief washing through me that we at least had somewhere to sleep tonight. but tomorrow loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon. "Are you okay, Mommy?" Lily asked, her 5-year-old intuition picking up on my stress despite my attempts to hide it. "I'm okay, baby. Just making some plans for us." I forced a smile. "Are you guys hungry?" We left before finishing breakfast. James nodded enthusiastically, and I dug through my purse to find a few dollars for the hot dog vendor at the edge of the park. As I counted out the cash, calculating how much we could spare for this meal, a shadow fell across the bench. I looked up to see an elderly woman standing before us, leaning slightly on a carved wooden cane. She looked vaguely familiar, and after a moment, I placed her Mrs. Garcia, who lived 3 houses down from my mother. She had moved to the neighborhood when I was in high school, so we hadn't known each other well, but she had always waved and smiled when I visited my mother over the years. "Ivy Collins, isn't it?" she asked, her accent hinting at her Puerto Rican heritage. "Yes," I replied, surprised she remembered me. "Hello, Mrs. Garcia." "I saw what happened this morning," she said directly. No preamble. "Your mother putting your things out and those poor children crying." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. So our family drama had indeed had an audience. "It's a complicated situation," I said vaguely, not wanting to discuss it in front of James and Lily. She nodded, her dark eyes wise and knowing. "Family usually is. Do you have somewhere to go?" The directness of the question took me aback. In the polite, reserved neighborhood where I grew up, people didn't ask such personal questions, especially of virtual strangers. But there was genuine concern in her face, not mere nosiness. "We're working on it," I said, which wasn't exactly a lie, but wasn't exactly the truth either. Mrs. Garcia studied me for a long moment, then looked at James and Lily. "Children, there's an ice cream cart on the other side of the park. Would you like some?" Their faces lit up, looking to me for permission. I hesitated, not comfortable with accepting charity, but unwilling to deny them this small pleasure after such a difficult morning. "That's very kind," I said finally. "Thank you." Mrs. Garcia handed each child a $5 bill. "Go pick what you like. Stay where your mother can see you." They ran off excitedly, and Mrs. Garcia took their place on the bench beside me. "Now tell me the truth. Do you have somewhere to go?" Something about her direct but kind approach broke through my remaining defenses. "We have a couch for tonight. After that, I don't know." She nodded as if confirming something to herself. "I have a small apartment in my basement. It's nothing fancy, just a bedroom, bathroom, and kitchenette. I used to rent it out to students, but it's been empty since my last tenant graduated in December. You and your children can stay there while you figure things out." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Mrs. Garcia, that's incredibly generous, but why would you do that for us? You barely know me." She smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. "When I was 29, my husband died suddenly, leaving me with 3 small children and no family in this country. My landlord evicted us because he didn't want children in the building. A woman I had met only once at church took us in until I could find work in a new place. I never forgot that kindness." She patted my hand. "Sometimes the help we need comes from unexpected places." It seemed too good to be true, and caution made me hesitate. "I don't know when I'd be able to pay rent. I lost my job when we were evicted. It was too far to commute from my mother's, and I couldn't afford childcare. We can work something out," she said simply. "Perhaps you can help me with some housekeeping and yard work. My arthritis makes it difficult to do everything myself these days." The children returned with their ice cream chocolate smeared around their happy mouths. Mrs. Garcia smiled at them warmly. "Did you thank the nice ice cream man?" They nodded solemnly, and James added, "Yes, ma'am, and we said please, too." "Excellent manners," she approved, winking at me. "Your mother has taught you well." I felt tears prick at my eyes at this simple acknowledgement of my parenting so different from my own mother's constant criticism. "Mrs. Garcia, are you sure about your offer? 3 people in your basement apartment?" "Carmen," she corrected. "Call me Carmen. And yes, I am sure. The apartment is sitting empty collecting dust. Better it should house a family who needs it. She stood leaning on her cane. Finish your ice cream, children, then come help an old lady walk home. I think I twisted my ankle earlier. I knew she was creating a pretext to preserve my dignity, a way for us to accept help, without it feeling like charity, and I was profoundly grateful for her tact. The children eagerly agreed to help, proud to be given such an important responsibility. As we gathered our belongings and began the walk back toward my mother's street, now with a different destination, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Fear and uncertainty still dominated, but underneath was a tiny flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. When we reached Carmen's house, a modest but well-maintained bungalow, she led us around to a separate entrance on the side. The basement apartment was indeed small, but clean, and furnished with simple, functional pieces. The main room served as both living room and bedroom, with a full-size bed in one corner and a pull-out sofa against the opposite wall. The kitchenette consisted of a mini refrigerator, microwave, hot plate, and a small table with 4 chairs. The bathroom was basic but had everything we needed. "It's not much," Carmen said, watching my face anxiously. "But it's warm and private." "It's perfect," I replied honestly, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need. Just help those beautiful children grow into good people." She handed me a key. "Now I'll leave you to get settled. Come upstairs for dinner at 6. Yes, no arguments. First night tradition." After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to cry again, but these were different tears. Relief, gratitude, and the overwhelming emotion of finding kindness from a virtual stranger when my own mother had turned us away. Lily climbed into my lap, her small hands patting my wet cheeks. "Don't be sad, Mommy. This is a nice place, and the lady is nice too." "I'm not sad, sweetheart," I told her, hugging her close. "Sometimes people cry when they're happy too." "That's confusing," James declared, exploring the small space with curious eyes. I laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised me with its ease. "Yes, it is. Feelings are complicated sometimes." As I began unpacking our few belongings, I texted Tanya to thank her for her offer, but explained that we'd found another solution. Then I silenced my phone, ignoring the 3 missed calls from my mother. Whatever she had to say could wait. Right now, in this tiny basement apartment offered by a kind-hearted neighbor, we had found something precious, a moment of peace, and the first fragile foundations of a new beginning. We might have lost almost everything, but we still had each other. And for tonight, we had a roof over our heads and the unexpected blessing of human kindness. It would be enough to sustain us through whatever came next. The first few weeks in Carmen's basement apartment were a roller coaster of emotions and challenges. While grateful for the safe haven, I was acutely aware that this was only a temporary solution. I needed to find stable employment and permanent housing for my children, but every step forward seemed accompanied by 2 steps back. My first job interview was for an administrative position at a local insurance office. I had the qualifications and the experience, and the interview seemed to go well until the inevitable question arose. "The office hours are 8:30 to 5:30 Monday through Friday," the hiring manager explained. "Would that be a problem for you?" I hesitated, knowing honesty might cost me the opportunity, but unwilling to set myself up for failure. "I have 2 young children," I explained. "They're in school until 3, but I'd need to arrange childcare for the afternoon hours." "And you have that arranged?" he pressed. "I'm working on it," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. I had been researching options, all of which were prohibitively expensive for someone with no income. His expression told me everything I needed to know. "We need someone who can commit to the full hours from day one. I'm sorry." I left the office fighting back tears of frustration. Without a job, I couldn't afford childcare. Without childcare, I couldn't get a job. It was a vicious cycle that seemed impossible to break. Carmen became an unexpected source of support during this time. Though she had initially offered to watch the children occasionally while I job hunted, she gradually took on more seeming to genuinely enjoy their company. "They remind me of my own children at that age," she told me one afternoon as I returned from another fruitless interview to find her teaching James and Lily how to make empanadas in her kitchen. Full of questions and wonder. "I can't keep imposing on you like this," I protested, even as gratitude welled up inside me. "You've already done so much." She waved away my concerns with flour-covered hands. "I live alone in a house too big for me. The noise and energy of children is a blessing, not an imposition." Still, I knew we couldn't rely on Carmen's generosity forever. I needed to find work that would accommodate my situation as a single parent. After several more traditional job rejections, I began researching work-from-home opportunities. Many turned out to be scams or required upfront investments I couldn't afford. But eventually, I found a legitimate data entry position through a virtual assistant company. The pay was minimal, but I could work during the evenings after the children were asleep, and it would at least provide some income while I continued searching for something more substantial. My first paycheck, while small, felt like a victory. I ceremoniously withdrew $20 in cash and took the children for ice cream to celebrate, setting aside the rest for the emergency fund I was trying to build. It was a tiny step, but a step nonetheless. The next hurdle was getting James and Lily enrolled in the local school. Without a permanent address, the process became complicated, requiring Carmen to sign affidavits confirming we resided with her. The school administrators were suspicious of our situation, and I could feel their judgment as I explained our circumstances. "My concern," the principal said during our meeting, "is the instability of your living arrangement. Children need consistency, Ms. Collins." "I'm aware of that," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the implication that I was failing my children. "And I'm working to provide that consistency. In the meantime, they need education." Eventually, after providing every document I could gather and Carmen's persistent advocacy on our behalf, James and Lily were enrolled. Their first day at the new school was anxiety-inducing for all of us, but particularly for James, who had already changed schools once that year during our eviction. "What if nobody likes me?" he asked as I helped him put on his backpack that morning. "What if I don't know the right answers?" "Just be yourself," I told him, straightening his collar. "You're smart and kind, and that's what matters most. And remember, it's okay to be nervous. New things are always a little scary at first." Despite my reassurances, the adjustment was difficult. James began having behavioral issues, acting out in class and getting into arguments with other children. His teacher requested a conference after just 2 weeks, during which she suggested he might benefit from counseling to address anger issues. "He's experiencing significant changes and losses," I explained, trying not to feel defensive. "He's never had behavioral problems before." "Nevertheless," she insisted, "we can't have him disrupting the learning environment for other students." I left the meeting feeling like a failure, adding, "Find affordable counseling for James," to my already overwhelming list of concerns. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat on the small porch outside our basement apartment and allowed myself a rare moment to simply feel the weight of everything we were going through. It was during one of these moments of quiet reflection that I noticed another mother from James and Lily's school walking past Carmen's house. She slowed when she saw me, then approached hesitantly. "You're James and Lily's mom, right? I'm Diana, Noah's mother, from Miss Patterson's class." I nodded, somewhat surprised she knew who I was. "I volunteer in the classroom sometimes," she explained, perhaps noting my confusion. "James is a bright kid. He's having a hard time adjusting, but Ms. Patterson might be overreacting a bit. She's new and still figuring out classroom management." The simple act of another parent defending my son brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Diana sat down beside me on the step, and before I knew it, I was telling her our whole story: the divorce, the eviction, my mother's rejection, our current precarious situation. Instead of the judgment I had grown accustomed to, Diana listened with empathy and understanding. "I'm a single mom too," she shared. "It's just Noah and me since his dad left when he was 2. It's not easy even with a decent job and stable housing. I can't imagine doing it without those things." Our conversation shifted to the practical challenges of single parenting, particularly childcare. "A few of us have an informal arrangement," Diana explained. "We trade off watching each other's kids after school and on weekends when someone has to work. It saves us all a fortune in babysitting fees." "That sounds amazing," I said wistfully. "Why don't you join us?" "We could always use another person in the rotation, and it would give James a chance to make friends in a smaller setting." The offer seemed too good to be true, but Diana was sincere. By the end of our conversation, I had been added to a group text with 2 other single mothers, and we had arranged for James and Lily to go to Diana's apartment the following afternoon, while I went to a job interview I'd previously been planning to cancel due to lack of childcare. This new connection opened doors I hadn't even realized were closed. Through Diana and the other mothers in the childcare share, I learned about resources for single parents in the community food banks that didn't require permanent addresses, sliding-scale medical clinics, free after-school programs, and job opportunities that accommodated parents of school-aged children. One of these leads resulted in a part-time office position at a small local business that needed help 3 days a week during school hours. The pay wasn't tremendous, but combined with my evening data entry work, it would be enough to start saving for our own place. The day I received the job offer, I came home to find an email from my ex-husband's parents. My mother had apparently followed through on contacting them as they expressed concern about our situation and offered financial help. Their assistance came with implicit strings, however, mentioning how much they missed the children and how they had plenty of room in their house. It was tempting to accept their money. It would certainly make our lives easier in the short term. But I remembered my mother's similar help and how quickly it had turned into control and ultimatums. After careful consideration, I replied thanking them for their concern, but declining financial support. I did, however, suggest that if they wanted to be part of the children's lives, we could arrange visits once we were more settled. Just as I was beginning to feel a fragile sense of stability forming around us, my mother attempted to re-establish contact. Her text messages started with angry accusations about my drama and ingratitude, then gradually shifted to concerned inquiries about the children, and finally to thinly veiled attempts to find out where we were staying. I responded minimally, not willing to subject myself to her emotional manipulation, but not ready to completely sever ties either. 1 month after our hasty departure from her house, she left a voicemail that caught me off guard. "I miss you and the kids," she said, her voice softer than I was accustomed to hearing. "Maybe I was too harsh. We should talk." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more concession than I'd ever heard from her before. I deliberated for days before responding with a carefully worded text suggesting we meet for coffee without the children present. I wasn't ready to expose James and Lily to her influence again until I was certain her change of heart was genuine. Our meeting was tense and awkward, neither of us quite knowing how to bridge the chasm that had formed between us. She asked about our living situation, and I gave vague answers, unwilling to share details she might use to interfere. "I still think you're making things harder than they need to be," she said eventually. "But I shouldn't have said those things about the children, or threatened to stop helping you." "It wasn't the threat that hurt Mom," I replied. "It was the condition attached to it, that I should choose between my children and your support." She didn't directly acknowledge this, instead pivoting to an offer. "You can still come home, all of you. I've cleared out the yoga room. It could work as a bedroom for the kids." The offer was tempting in its practicality, but I recognized it for what it was, another attempt to regain control, not a genuine change of heart. "Thank you, but we're establishing our own home now," I told her. "What we need is a relationship with boundaries and mutual respect, not financial dependence." She didn't like this answer, but she didn't storm out either. We parted with an agreement to talk again, a tiny step toward whatever new relationship might be possible between us. That evening, as I tucked James and Lily into bed in our small basement apartment, I realized something important despite all the uncertainty and challenges we still faced. The constant knot of anxiety in my chest had begun to loosen. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were finding our way forward one small victory at a time. "Are we going to live here forever?" James asked sleepily as I kissed his forehead. "No, honey," I replied. "This is just a stopping place on our journey, but we're going to be okay no matter where we live." And for the first time in months, perhaps years, I truly believed it. 6 months after that rainy night on my mother's doorstep, our lives had transformed in ways I could never have predicted. We had moved out of Carmen's basement into a small but comfortable 2-bedroom apartment of our own, just 3 blocks from the children's school. It wasn't in an upscale neighborhood, and the appliances were outdated, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, ours. The journey to this stability hadn't been linear. There had been setbacks and moments of despair along the way. The day our application for the apartment was approved, the transmission in the used car I'd purchased with my carefully saved emergency fund failed, requiring repairs that depleted most of our security deposit savings. I'd spent a night crying silently in the bathroom, overwhelmed by the seemingly endless obstacles. But the next morning, I'd wiped my tears and found solutions. Diana and the other mothers in our childcare cooperative had organized a surprise housewarming collecting furniture, kitchenware, and even gift cards to help us get established. Carmen had insisted on paying the security deposit as a graduation present, refusing all my attempts to decline her generosity. "Let others help you," she'd said firmly. "Someday, you'll be the one helping someone else. That's how we create community." My work situation had stabilized as well. The part-time office position had expanded to full-time when another employee relocated, and I'd been able to reduce my evening data entry hours to just weekends. The regular schedule and improved income had made an enormous difference in our daily lives and my ability to be present for James and Lily. James's behavioral issues had gradually improved as our circumstances stabilized. The counseling services I'd found through a community nonprofit had given him tools to express his feelings about all the changes and losses he'd experienced. His nightmares about being sent away had decreased, and he'd made several good friends through school and our neighborhood. Lily had adapted with the remarkable resilience of a 5-year-old, though she still occasionally asked difficult questions about why her grandmother didn't want them to stay. I tried to answer honestly, but age-appropriately, emphasizing that adults sometimes make mistakes and that her grandmother's behavior wasn't because of anything Lily had done wrong. Our relationship with my mother remained complicated. After several tense meetings and conversations, we'd established a fragile truce. She visited occasionally for brief supervised interactions with the children, though these visits often left me emotionally drained from maintaining boundaries while managing her critical comments and subtle manipulation attempts. "You're letting them eat that for breakfast," she'd ask, or, "Shouldn't James's hair be shorter? It looks unkempt." I was learning to respond calmly but firmly. "This works for us," or simply, "I've got this handled, thank you." Small assertions of independence that would have been impossible during the years I relied on her financial support. The most significant change, however, wasn't in our external circumstances, but in my internal landscape. The woman who had stood trembling on her mother's doorstep, desperate for help, and willing to accept almost any conditions attached to it, had been transformed by adversity into someone stronger, more confident, and fiercely protective of her autonomy. I'd created an emergency savings fund, tucking away a little from each paycheck until I had enough to cover 2 months of expenses if needed. The security of this financial cushion, modest though it was, gave me a peace of mind I hadn't experienced since before my marriage collapsed. One unexpected development came when my ex-husband reappeared after nearly a year of minimal contact. Mark contacted me through his lawyer expressing a desire to reconnect with James and Lily. My initial reaction was anger and resentment. He had abandoned us when things got difficult, leaving me to handle the fallout of his addiction and irresponsibility alone. After careful consideration and consultation with the children's counselor, I agreed to supervised visits at a family center. The first reunion was emotional and awkward, the children uncertain how to interact with the father they hadn't seen in so long. Mark seemed genuinely remorseful, explaining that he'd been in rehabilitation for his gambling addiction and was working to rebuild his life. "I don't expect forgiveness," he told me after the visit, "but I want to be part of their lives again, whatever that looks like." I set clear boundaries from the beginning. "They need consistency and honesty," I told him. "If you can't maintain regular contact and follow through on your promises, then it's better not to make them at all." To my surprise, Mark agreed without argument. "I've learned the hard way what happens when you don't face your responsibilities," he said. "I won't disappoint them again." Time would tell if he could keep that promise, but I was cautiously optimistic about him having a positive role in the children's lives, even if it was more limited than before. As I unpacked the last box in our new apartment, I found the small photo of my high school graduation that I'd discovered hidden on my mother's bookshelf all those months ago. I studied it for a long moment, seeing with fresh eyes the nervous, eager girl I'd been standing beside a mother whose approval I'd never quite managed to earn. I placed the photo on our new bookshelf, not hidden, but not prominently displayed, either just one chapter in a longer story that was still being written. Beside it, I put a more recent photo of James, Lily, and me at the community park, our faces bright with laughter, despite the second-hand clothes and my visible exhaustion. That image captured something the formal graduation photo didn't: authentic joy and connection. Later that evening, as I tucked the children into their beds in their new shared bedroom, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't, but because we had weathered the worst storm of our lives and emerged intact together and stronger. "I like our new home," Lily murmured sleepily as I pulled her blanket up to her chin. "Me too, sweetie," I replied, kissing her forehead. "Are we safe here?" James asked from his bed across the room, the question revealing the lingering anxiety he still carried. "Yes," I told him with conviction. "We're safe, and we're together. That's what matters most." After they had fallen asleep, I sat in our small living room, reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The path from my mother's doorstep to this moment had been painful and difficult, but it had also revealed truths I might never have discovered otherwise. I had learned that family isn't always defined by blood, but by who stands with you in your darkest moments. Carmen, Diana, and the other single mothers who had formed our support network had become more family to us than my own mother had ever been. I had discovered reserves of strength within myself that I never knew existed, the courage to walk away from toxic situations, even when the alternative was terrifying uncertainty. The resilience to face repeated setbacks without surrendering to despair. The wisdom to accept help without shame. Most importantly, I had learned that love shouldn't come with conditions. True love, the kind I felt for my children and was learning to extend to myself, was steadfast and unconditional. It didn't threaten to withdraw when things got difficult or demand impossible choices. The journey wasn't over. We still had challenges to face and wounds that were healing. But I no longer feared the future or doubted my ability to protect and provide for my children. Whatever came next, we would face it together with the strength and wisdom earned through our darkest days. When I thought back to that rainy night and my mother's whispered words, "There isn't enough space for your kids. I'm no longer paying your way if they stay," I no longer felt the crushing despair that had once overwhelmed me. Instead, I recognized it as the moment when I finally chose myself and my children over the conditional acceptance I had sought my entire life. It wasn't the ending I would have chosen, but it had led to a new beginning, one built on genuine connections, hard-earned wisdom, and the unshakable knowledge that some boundaries once established make possible the most important freedom of all. The freedom to define your own worth and create the family you deserve, whether bound by blood or by something far stronger, love freely given and received. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to choose between someone's conditional support and your own self-respect? What boundaries have you set that changed your life for the better? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of finding strength in difficult moments. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful new beginnings.